last video I made about McGregor, I pretty much buried him in the aftermath of his most recent scandal. The rationale was simple. The incident was the latest part of a downward spiral. He's never really paused for thought before. He largely lives in an insulated bubble created by one of the most rabid fan bases in the sport, and critically, the factors that motivated his rise appeared to be gone. It was less than 24 hours later that I began to suspect I may have buried his career alive. He appeared on ESPN and showed a side of himself that we really hadn't seen before. Conor's entire demeanor was pretty shocking and indicated to me that the whole episode may in fact precede some serious self-reflection and hopefully some drastic changes. The interview began with McGregor taking full responsibility for the situation. Now, I don't think we should be giving him too much credit for that. He was caught red-handed. He had no choice.
In reality, it doesn't matter what happened there. I was in the wrong. That man deserved to enjoy his time in the pub without having it to end the way it did, and I was in the wrong. I must come here before you and take accountability and take responsibility.
But even though he accepted responsibility, he was too embarrassed to address any of the actual details. Ariel asked him twice to comment on the incident, and both times, McGregor just shuts it down. He was totally ashamed of it.
The video is a little grainy. Did you in fact punch that man?
Look, in respect to the whole entire situation, we'll let it play out with what happens with what happens with it. So,
could you tell us your side of the story from what you recall?
Again, like what could I say? It does not matter. There's no answer to what was done. I was completely in the wrong, so there's no need to even discuss what began it.
The guy was terribly embarrassed. There was large periods of this interview where Conor looked like he was almost in physical pain, and he described the video as being like a dagger in the heart.
To see it, it's like a dagger into my heart as a young martial artist. So I'm just here to own up to that and move on and carry on and face what's coming with it.
Now, I've never seen Conor like this. He's meek and very unsure of himself, stuttering and soft-spoken. He was suffering here. He was almost entirely complimentary of his rivals. Now, to be fair, Conor's not above paying fighters compliments, but this interview was totally uncharacteristic. He was full of praise.
The very first thing he said post-fight was, the Nick Diaz army. He gave a shout out to his brother, and I hope his brother's doing well. I hope Nick is doing well, a soldier of the game, of the fight, of the real fight game. But that's why the fans love Nate. That's why I love and respect Nate. And so I've been watching Anthony closely also, and he fought Wonderboy Thompson a lot differently. He caught him with that shot, and look what that, it was in a phenomenal finish, and then it got him the big fight with Nate. Tony's another warrior. Tony is another warrior. I've got a lot of respect for Tony also. The Holloway bout is certainly a bout I'm interested in. I've a lot of respect for Max.
I don't know if he was hoping to curry favor with his rivals or if he simply didn't want to further offend any fans, but it wasn't typical. Conor is usually so unapologetic in everything he says and does. It really came across like he was desperate to ingratiate himself, stark contrast to his usual attitude. But for me, the most surprising moment of the interview was when Conor talked about wanting to avoid becoming another combat sports cautionary tale, in the vein of a Mike Tyson.
I can either be rich and spoiled and blow it all in this generation and leave it all behind in ruins, or I can get my head together and build it and make it generational. I must get this right, and I must not go down that path, the written path, the cliche of the fighter that has it all. And
Ariel then asked him if he's worried it might be too late to avoid becoming a cautionary tale, and McGregor answers this question in complete sincerity and with total uncertainty.
Are you worried it's too late?
I mean, I don't feel, look, I don't know, Ariel. I'm just going to carry on being. I know who I am as a human being. My people know who I am as a human being, and what kind of father I am, what kind of son I am, what kind of brother I am, what kind of friend I am. And that's it. I will continue to just be good as a human being and not focus on, not worry too much about that. If it is, it is. But I do not believe so. I will earn it back.
Now, I mean, McGregor did eventually say that he didn't believe it was too late for him, but the first words out of his mouth was that he didn't know. The guy was totally lost here. I don't think there's ever been a point throughout all his ups and downs where that would have even been a question for Conor. And yet here he was, totally unsure of himself. I've never seen a more doubt-filled, regretful soundbite from Conor McGregor. I didn't even think the guy was capable of it. I gotta say though, one of the great things about this interview is that he appears to wear his heart on his sleeve. in a way that I don't think we've seen since his walk around Dublin. That time he was an open book and full of ambition, pride, vision, determination. It was probably the most endearing interview he's ever done. This time, he was again an open book, but he was full of shame, embarrassment, regret, and just pain. It was, in general, a sorry-ass appearance of a man in complete crisis. But by virtue of that, I felt it was one of the most encouraging interviews McGregor's done in years, because it at least promised some self-reflection and the possibility of a course correction.
And I'm very, very excited to give my fans something to cheer about again. And I do this for my fans, for the people that are supporting me, for the people that dare to dream the highest of heights. So I look forward to my triumphant return, Ariel.
How we got here is kind of interesting. The incident happened in April, but this interview was from August. So obviously, McGregor wasn't shook by the fact that he had done the deed. He was already over that. As he said in this interview, he felt he made amends for it at the time.
5 months ago it was, and I tried to make amends, and I made amends back then. It's still, the fans don't even, that does not even matter. I was in the wrong.
He was rattled by the video emerging and the near universal condemnation he received, including from his own fans. Like, McGregor has done shit before, but he's never had his die-hard fans turn on him. I already played this clip, but it's a perfect illustration of the point. Here's an Irish publican who had framed posters of McGregor on a wall. He bought cases of Proper 12 for his bar. He's an undeniable McGregor supporter. And yet here he is, pouring Proper 12 straight down his shitter, calling him a lowlife in the process. This is simply hard to ignore. He cannot be dismissed as a hater. And he wasn't a bad representation of Conor's fan base in general, which appeared to be collapsing on social media. That's one thing I really hadn't considered. The idea that his own fan base turning on him may be a sobering boot up the fucking ass for the guy. McGregor's fans have never let him down. They order his fights, travel to his events, they buy all his shit. And they didn't let him down here either. It almost seemed that by turning on him, or at least getting real with him, McGregor's fan base staged somewhat of an intervention. It's like they were saying, look, Conor, this is a safe space. We love you. But what the fuck are you doing here? We want to support you, but you're making that fucking impossible. Not all, by the way. There were plenty of fans who still fought his corner. And I think there's a side point worth making here. You know, most people were highly critical of McGregor, but there were those who rushed to his defense and attacked his critics with comments like, you know, you're just jealous. Conor's still way more successful than you. You're such a fucking hater. You saw these comments all over social media. I got some of them on this video. And I'd have to think these people are doing Conor more harm than good by signaling they'll have his back no matter what. Like, if you have a Conor McGregor tattoo, I'll give you a pass. You know, you almost have to take his side on everything. Getting a tattoo of another man is a fanatic's equivalent of walking down the fucking aisle. Till death or some expensive laser treatment do us part. In general though, mindless support is not what the guy needed here. And you can tie it in with another aspect of combat sports where honest feedback is critical. We had a great example recently with Nick Diaz. You know, he had a long interview with Ariel and most people came to the same conclusion. Yeah, it's not cut and dry. It's hard to tell exactly what was going on here. It may have been alcohol related, but in terms of returning to the cage, you'd have to advocate caution because his speech did appear to have declined. That seemed obvious to most viewers, but you did have people who were like, nah, same old Nick, love to see him back in the Octagon. So it's kind of a weird situation where the people who would consider themselves the most loyal supporters are the ones least aligned with the fighter's well-being. I've quoted from this before. It's a 1981 article called Age is a Fighter's Natural Opponent by Ferdy Pacheco, Muhammad Ali's longtime friend and physician. It's an article about the degenerative brain injuries sustained by aging fighters, but Pacheco also discusses the type of self-deception of a fighter and the group denial of his fans that can lead the fighter to compete well beyond the point where it's medically advisable. Consider the ones who are not lucky, those boxers who have once been champions, who are considered heroes, whose fans cannot believe that the skills that made them great are gone. those unlucky boxers fight past 35, deluded by their fans, by their managers, by their mirrors, and by their brains, which are not functioning in a manner that allow them to make the correct judgments. Surrounded by people who want them to fight for financial or other reasons, deluded by their own egos and flawed judgments, seeing themselves as they were, not as they are. Viewing the new Raw fighters as easy pickings, they return in a pathetic travesty, a worn remake of every Hollywood B-movie about boxing. These are the prime candidates for punch-drunk syndrome, the prime candidates to be pointed to by the clucking do-gooders who wish to eliminate boxing. That's an important point, the idea that the fighters are deluded by their fans, their mirrors, and their brains, and that they see themselves not as they are, but as they were. Some junctures in a fighter's career are so critical that if they can't take an honest look in the mirror, the best thing their fans can do for them is help them face reality by offering them an honest reflection. And we saw that with Nick. Overwhelmingly, the comments I saw regarding a return to the cage were of concern and advocating caution, which was great to see. And for Conor, I think that's exactly what we saw, albeit in a different context. He had previously sailed through every transgression without any real or lasting regret. I mean, what did he say after the Dolly incident? It had to be done. He knew the vast majority of his fan base was sticking with him. But here, he did something most of them couldn't ignore, and they finally began to turn on him. The subset of his fans who got defensive, who told his critics to shut the fuck up or stop hating, they might view themselves as the most supportive, or the most loyal. But for Conor, who was in a deep hole, they were basically telling him, hey, it's okay, just keep digging. On the other hand, when it comes to the fans who gave McGregor an honest dose of reality, I think he owes them a debt of gratitude, because the result was this. They offered McGregor something he desperately needed, and that was an opportunity for some serious self-reflection.
I'm also having long, hard discussions with myself, daily discussions.
The result, and almost the contents of those long conversations with himself, became apparent 6 weeks later, in a pair of appearances in Russia and the Ukraine. In terms of his demeanor, McGregor was back to his old self. In fact, he cut a phenomenal promo for his return.
But forget him for the minute. Like I said, January 18th, the return of a fully focused, notorious Conor McGregor will take place in the T-Mobile Arena in Las Vegas, Nevada. Ask the UFC who the opponent is, because I do not give a fuck. I am going to go through the entire roster like a chainsaw through butter. Make no mistake about that.
And he was once again unapologetic, taking shots at Khabib.
If you look at Khabib Nurmagomedov, he almost died on the scales making 155 pounds. Yet he wants to bring a former middleweight, a former welterweight down to make 155 pounds. It is the sign of a coward. But where is he right now? I believe he's out of the country. I fly in, he flies out. Typical of the Dagestani man. The man sniffs jockstraps for a living. He sniffs buttholes for a living. If you want to know what my ass smells like, just ask Khabib, because he smelled it for the entire first round.
You're in Moscow today. Are you planning someday to go to Dagestan?
You know, I wouldn't go to Dagestan to take a shit, and that is the truth.
Conor is desperate for that rematch, and if you compare it to how he tiptoed around Khabib not wanting to fight the previous month, it's night and day.
I wanted similarities to Khabib to prepare for that, because he doesn't want to have the rematch, you know, and whatever. I just wanted to compete now. Enough is enough. Let's get me back in the mix.
This is an inevitable rematch. He can run as long as he wants. He can try and throw featherweights or people that I've beaten in the past in front of me. But again, it is an inevitable rematch. He can run, but he cannot hide. So it is a heated rivalry. And I believe we will settle it someday soon.
So at least superficially, McGregor was back to his old self, in a way that I would argue we haven't seen in a long time. The bravado and confidence was in full swing. But there was also a lot of encouraging substance behind what he was saying. It didn't sound like the mostly hot air he's been blowing as of late. The ideas flying out of his face did sound like the result of a lot of intense self-reflection. Having concrete goals and being outspoken about them was one of the hallmarks of McGregor's early career. But what was Conor's major goal heading into the Khabib fight? Obviously, he spoke about winning, but I think his major ambition revolved around Proper 12, launching this new business. That's where his head seemed to be. So it's been a long time since we've heard McGregor speak in a committed fashion about the sport of MMA, talking with actual conviction and thinking multiple fights ahead. You know, here's how McGregor used to sound.
I feel I want Jose to show up. I'm going to retire Jose, I'm going to end his career, and then I've done what I've said I would do. I said I would kill the featherweight division. There's nobody left. In my mind, I'm thinking unify and destroy. I'm going to unify the belts and destroy the division, and then I'm going to go up and take the lightweight division as well. So that's where I'm headed right now.
He used to talk with such vision and determination. It was gripping. You could tell he was dialed in. His head was in the game. And he is starting to sound like that again.
Ask the UFC who the opponent is, because I do not give a fuck who the opponent is. January 18th, the return of the notorious Conor McGregor. That will be the beginning of my season. I will then look to compete against the winner of Nate Diaz, Jorge Masvidal for the bad motherfucker title. Then I will seek the Moscow bout, and it will be against the winner of Tony Ferguson and Khabib Nurmagomedov. I can't even say the guy's name. Who gives a fuck what the guy's name is? But that is the bout we want. We want this bout in Moscow.
McGregor spoke about having long conversations with himself, and I think you can get a sense of where his inner monologue went based on some of the ideas he repeatedly brought up in these interviews. More than once he spoke about forming new habits, which I think is an overdue admission and rejection of certain toxic elements of the lifestyle he had been living. Instead of partying out of control, he's now advocating a regimented lifestyle, full of discipline and structure.
We want to know about it.
You know, right now it takes 66 days to form a habit. So right now I'm in a process of forming a new habit. I am going to bed early and waking up early. I'm a firm believer that structure is the true key to success. The structure is the true key to billions, I feel. Any billionaire or any successful person I've met, they are structured. They go to sleep at a specific time. They wake up at a specific time.
He also reflected on the importance of work ethic.
For me, mental strength comes from your commitment, the work ethic you put in. For me, my mental strength comes from my work ethic, from my focus. And trust me when I tell you, I am focused here. I am structured now. I am developing a solid structure. I go to bed at the same time. I wake up at the same time. And I train at the same time. There is structure.
I mean, we are all human. Without the work, if we do not put the work in, you won't get the reward. So that's it.
He repeated these ideas in both press conferences. So I think it's a good indication of the type of sentiments that are rolling around his head, dominating his internal monologue. When McGregor says, "Trust me, there is structure," I fucking believe him. The guy seems possessed, and this is the first time I've got that sense in years. Obviously, if Conor's talking about new habits, booze is the first habit we'd want to see him kick. And he does talk about abstinence for the duration of the camp.
You know, for me now, I enter camp. So when I leave this, like I said, 12 weeks this Saturday, my bout will be. I will not touch my beautiful whiskey, and that will be a tough challenge for me. I'm not going to lie, but it will be a challenge that I am looking forward to conquering. It is an inevitable rematch. It is a rematch that I will come in sharp, fresh. I will have no injuries. I will have no alcohol. I will have no outside influences. I will be fully focused.
Thank God for that. I mean, I know people dispute this, whether it was an act or not, but I am one of the people who believes Conor was drunk during his press conference, or at least not fit to drive.
I'm gonna love 6 October, what you gonna do? This is not stomping on your head.
But for McGregor, the issue with alcohol went way beyond partying. It boiled down to being spread too thin, and possibly even devoting the greater part of himself to Proper 12. He alluded to that here. He doesn't mention it directly, but I think it's pretty obvious he's referring to Proper 12 distracting him in the lead up to the Khabib fight.
My confidence has always come from my work ethic. You know what I mean? I am a very, very hard worker in whatever I am engaged in. You know, sometimes I will, if I have one thing lined up and then I have another thing lined up, I'll put more work into that, into one certain entity or business or whatever, and then the other one will not get that work, and then I will pay the price for that, and that's it. So.
Good to hear that admission from McGregor. I mean, I don't know if he can ever beat Khabib, but he's certainly not going to do it while he's dividing himself between a fight camp and establishing a fucking whiskey brand. As he said himself, if you're not committed, you'll pay the price. One of the fights Conor and his team have repeatedly recalled is a Nate Diaz rematch.
For an example, for would be like the Diaz 1 rematch, the Diaz 1 fight, my preparation in the lead up to that, I was overtrained and I was run down by the time the fight came, and then midway through the second round, there was no more left in the tank. Then I went a bit more the scientific route, met the doctors and the trainers on the McGregor Fast program, and began formulating a proper training routine, and I was fully committed on my nutrition, on my training, on my sleep. I went to sleep at the same time, I woke up at the same time each day in camp, and I went and I avenged that loss. So,
for me, I had many ups and downs in my career, many adversities. An example I will give you, the Nate Diaz 1 fight and then the Nate Diaz 2 fight. The Nate Diaz 1 fight, my training camp was reckless. I was not structured. I would train when I felt like it. There was no set times. The Nate Diaz 2, the rematch, I went to bed at a specific time. I woke up at a specific time. And I was able to build the body up and get myself into prime physical condition to face a larger opponent who's renowned for his cardiovascular abilities. So structure for me was the key to success in that one, the key to retribution.
And to be honest, it is starting to have that feeling. If you recall the Nate rematch, it was initially booked for UFC 200, but Conor refused to go to Las Vegas for a bunch of press obligations, and he was promptly dropped from the event. At his recent appearance in Russia, he expressed a similar plan with regards to media.
There is structure and there is no outside influence. The fight is 12 weeks this Saturday. When I go from this press conference and this tour here, I go into camp, and you will not see me until I show up to fight.
Now, in the aftermath of getting pulled from UFC 200, and while still at odds with the UFC, he released the following statement, which I'll abbreviate. In his statement, Conor explains his rationale for wanting to bear less of the promotional burden heading into UFC 200. And I think that rationale very likely applies to this fight and might give us an indication of the tone and seriousness with which he's approaching his comeback. I have become lost in the game of promotion and forgot about the art of fighting. There comes a time when you need to stop handing out flyers and get back to the damn shop. 50 world tours, 200 press conferences, 1 million interviews, 2 million photo shoots, and at the end of it all, I'm left looking down the barrel of a lens, staring defeat in the face, thinking of nothing but my incorrect fight preparation and the many distractions that led to this. It is time to go back and live the life that got me this life. Sitting in a car on the way to some dump in Connecticut to speak to Tim and Susie on a Nobody Gives a Fuck morning show did not get me this life. I will always play the game and play it better than anybody. But just for this one, where I'm coming off a loss, I ask for some leeway, where I can just train and focus. I'm doing what I need for me now. It is time to be selfish with my training again. It is the only way. So from inside his camp, McGregor and his team have drawn repeated comparisons to the Nate rematch. And from the outside looking in, it does have the same intensely focused vibe and relative media silence. It seems likely to me that McGregor is in a very similar headspace. He feels like his back is against the wall and he's about to come out swinging for the fucking fences. All things considered, I was a little hasty burying McGregor's career. I'm not gonna beat myself up about it because everything prior to this video led me to believe the guy was done. His head wasn't in the game. He'd moved on from the sport in any meaningful sense, and it seemed the type of commitment required to compete at the highest level was simply beyond him. But everything following this video, from the ESPN interview and the obvious soul-searching, to these press conferences, the substance behind his words, and on to the subsequent calm before the storm, it all indicates to me that the guy is coming back with some real goals, some solid motivation, and with a lot to prove. Even if McGregor falls short in his goals, which are characteristically lofty, I think the guy is going to give us some spectacular moments next year. And despite everything that's happened, may even go on to resemble that inspirational figure who captivated the imagination of millions and who electrified an entire fucking sport.